Hi, my name is Leigh-Ann Kant. I'm from the Nelson Mandela University. I'm also part of the Sustainable Wildlife Economies project team, where I am providing expertise in the wildlife industry. It's not very particular to academia, however, it is because of my involvement in the organized wildlife ranching and hunting industry. So we have a very short presentation scheduled for today, so I hope I managed to cover most of the components. Please feel free to ask me any questions on the Thicket Forum chat group or privately if you wish, and enjoy the presentation. The wildlife ranching industry started to gain momentum after the Game Theft Act was introduced in 1991. And the Game Theft Act allowed for the private ownership of game species under certain circumstances or conditions. And these conditions were determined by fencing of the ranches, and farmers would then apply for certificate of adequate enclosure or exemption for permits depending on which province they were located. And this then allowed ranchers to trade wildlife, to start buying and selling wildlife for each other, and they could then manage these species for a profit or for an income, which made it a lucrative industry to be in. The wildlife industry has rapidly grown since 1991. In 2012, it was estimated to contribute about 7.7 billion to the GDP. And since 2012, it has also grown, and it has received a lot of attention in media for some of the extraordinary prices paid for some of these game animals, and specifically buffalo. Around 2012, our president, or back then he wasn't the president, was bidding for a buffalo bull, and that buffalo bull actually sold for 20 million. But he had been bidding up until 18 million rand for one individual buffalo bull. And then also in 2012, there was another record price of 26 million for a buffalo bull. And it didn't stop there. Later on in 2016, 44 million rand was paid for a quarter share of one buffalo. And from there, later on in 2016, and the current record price for a single buffalo bull is 168 million, which was sold at an auction in Tabatolo in 2016. There was a lot of controversy and speculation around the prices of these buffalo, and the wildlife industry, and specifically the breeding industry, was accused of being a bubble that would eventually burst. That is up for another debate. What I can say now is that buffalo are not currently fetching these prices. However, the average price of a buffalo is still that, or greater than that of what a cow or livestock would sell for, which is still making wildlife a lucrative industry to be in. Of course, these unusually high prices would attract a lot of attention to the wildlife industry, and a lot of this attention would be negative, and the industry would quite often be criticized for its intensive production, and it would be perceived as primarily being intensively produced wildlife species. However, this is not necessarily the case, and there are many other sectors that come from the wild industry, and these subsectors are, of course, your wildlife ranching, your wildlife activities, as well as wildlife products. And within these subsectors of wildlife ranching, the primary activities would be your breeding and live sales. And within the wildlife activities, some of the primary activities there would be your wildlife viewing, which is ecotourism, your trophy hunting, which is your international clients that come over to hunt game, and your biltong hunters or your local hunters, which would primarily hunt for meat, for home, or it would be for being out in nature and enjoying wildlife and being in the environment. Then there's the wildlife products, and this would be your game meat processing and other wildlife products such as your curios and decorations. Secondary contributors to support the wildlife industry value chain would be game capturers and transport services, veterinary services, fencing and maintenance services, accommodation, transport, equipment related to the capture of these species, as well as the taxidermy industry, and of course packaging and transporting some of these products. So we can now ask, what are the benefits of wildlife ranching? And this is where the Sustainable Wildlife Economies projects come in, as we try and understand the sustainability behind wildlife ranching or the wildlife economy. And the areas we're looking at is, what is the contribution to the surrounding communities? How does it stimulate the economy in our country? And how does it contribute to the sustainability goals in terms of conservation and biodiversity? And is it in fact more sustainable than agriculture? This data will serve as a good baseline for decision makers in government as well as industry to make sustainable decisions about the future of the wildlife industry. The wildlife industry, of course, has challenges, and just to name a few, the first being the development of new mindsets. And this can be done through communicating the role of wildlife ranching towards the economy as well as towards conservation practices. And wildlife management, particularly consumptive utilization of wildlife through hunting, can be seen as quite a negative towards sustainability of species or towards the conservation of species, when in fact this could be the contrary. Another point is government's capacity to implement regulations. And this could be through lack of data available to policymakers and decision makers. But also the industry is currently outgrowing some of the regulations that have been put in place prior to 1991. And one of the issues the industry is currently facing is whether it falls under Department of Agriculture or Environmental Affairs. And this is, of course, causing large debate within the industry, but as well as within policymakers and government authorities. Then there are large barriers to entry within the game industry, as becoming a wildlife rancher, one would need a large capital input and large amounts of money to either purchase land or infrastructure or game species. And this also doesn't facilitate any transformation within the industry. And once again, this is where the Sustainable Wildlife Economies projects comes in, where it bridges the gap between industry and decision makers within government, as well as creating a new dialogue within youth. I'm sure by now you must be wondering, why are we talking about the wildlife economy and the wildlife industry in the Thicket Forum? But this is potentially the best place to start this dialogue about the wildlife economy within the thicket biome. And this is also the place where we have started our survey and our research, and which could possibly contribute to decision makers within this beautiful biome. Thank you very much for your time. I know this was a really brief introduction to the wildlife industry, but please know that you're always welcome to contact me if you would like to further any discussion points or find out more about the industry.